folks, last night we had a conversation on the show where I talked about these executive orders and how MAGA and Donald Trump, how they are specifically targeting Black America with these orders. Now, many folks are like, well, man, I don't know about all of that. But what have I always told y'all? You have to follow the money. And if you're not having a money conversation, you're not having an American conversation. So you often hear me refer to the Reconstruction periods on this show. And I mention that all the time. Why do I mention that? It is because you've heard me also say, in the history of America, every time there's been a period of Black success, there's been a longer period of white backlash. And see, now you got people like Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Chris Murphy and others, and who just for them, no, this is not race, this is class. It's not what it is. But no, they're wrong. They're absolutely wrong. See, what you have to realize is that if you go back to the first Reconstruction, if you really want an understanding of this, and I guarantee you, if Greg was at home, he would reach back and grab it if he was there. If you really want to understand this, you have to understand this. This is called Black Reconstruction in America, 1860 to 1880, written by W.E.B. Du Bois. This here, y'all, for those of you, if you include the bibliography, if you even include the index, this is a 746-page book where he talks about the period of Reconstruction. What is the period of Reconstruction? It is that period after the end of the Civil War when you had a focus of the radical Republicans, which is not today's Republican Party, the radical Republicans, and if y'all really want to learn some history, go look up Thaddeus Stevens. These radical Republicans, they had no interest in bipartisanship. They wanted to change America. They said, damn the other people, we got the majority, run the bills through. And that's how you got the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, which are called the Reconstruction Amendments. That's when you begin to look at the Civil Rights Act that was passed in the 1860s that provided a framework for African Americans to be able to access, listen to y'all, contracts. I don't think some of y'all heard what I just said. One of those laws that was passed. It was not passed in 1854. It wasn't around the same time as Dred Scott decision. This particular act was passed because the radical Republicans understood that coming out of Reconstruction, that the freed people of African descent needed to be able to access the economic levers of the country in order for them to be able to move ahead. Now, this, if you look at it real quick here, I pulled it up. You see this AI overview. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 was the first federal law in the United States to define citizenship and protect the civil rights of all citizens. It also was a bill that dealt with economics. It was economics. And so what began to happen during Reconstruction? I would argue at the Reconstruction period, the first one, is the most successful period in the history of America for people of African descent. Because what happens during the Reconstruction period, you then begin to see freed people of African descent running for state legislature. You see them being elected to Congress. Do y'all realize that, which we now know to be hardcore right-wing Confederate, the first state that seceded from the Union because they wanted to support slavery, South Carolina, that had a majority Black legislature? Because you know why? The Black folks, at the numbers. Do y'all even recognize that taxpayer-funded education is a result of those free people of African descent putting it in the state constitution? James D. Anderson's book, The Education of Blacks in the South, 1860 to 1935, details that. You then begin to see, I know a lot of people get caught up in 40 acres and a mule, but Black folks were not waiting on 40 acres and a mule. They began to acquire property. They began to open businesses. You then begin to see, we talk about Black Wall Street in Tulsa in 1921 burning down. You literally had Black Wall Streets happening all over the country beginning during Reconstruction. But what then happened? And you can look at W.B. Du Bois' book, or if you want to, you can read Eric Foner's book, Reconstruction, America's Unfinished Revolution. He has it from 1863 to 1877. 1877 is kind of important. I'm about to get to it. So what then happens? All of a sudden, you begin to see African Americans creating opportunities, passing bills. You begin to see them building things and doing things and opening schools. And all of a sudden, you begin to have white folks who then go, you know what? That's enough. We done enough for these Negroes. Listen, we about tired of hearing about all this stuff we need to do. Yeah, I know we had them enslaved for 200 plus years, but can we just move along? We don't have time. White America started getting tired of doing things for those people. We've done enough for those people. Then there's an election, 1876, a contested election. Sounds quite familiar. And so the Republicans and Democrats then all of a sudden begin to say, well, you know what? Democrats say, well, hey, why don't we do this here? We're going to let y'all go ahead and y'all can go ahead and y'all had a presidency. But we're going to do a deal. Y'all got to pull these federal troops of the last 3 remaining southern capitals. Oh, I'm sorry. Remember I told y'all they kept saying we're getting tired of that? See, what happened was they put federal troops in state capitals to ensure that the Dixiecrats, the racists, would not take over. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. See, one of the big mistakes of Lincoln and the radical Republicans, of course, remember Lincoln gets assassinated, being he is followed by an absolute violent racist, Andrew Johnson. What then happens, he then goes, you know what? To hell with that. We're going to return the land to the slave owners if they apologize for what they did. So America put the folk back in power who were the ones who led the Civil War. So what then happens, you then begin to have this election. It gets contested. And so then there's a compromise. We ain't in the room. The white folks were making a deal. And that's known as the Great Compromise of 1877. Do y'all know what came after the Great Compromise of 1877? The Reconstruction period ended. That's when the period of Jim Crow started. These white folks were like, no, we have done enough for these black people. We are sick and tired of doing this. So then we come around to a second Reconstruction. All of a sudden, Emmett Till gets killed August 28, 1955. And all of a sudden, you have these black women in Montgomery, Alabama, the Women's Council, who were organizing, and they were doing what they were supposed to do. Then all of a sudden, you then begin to have these black women. It was not the black preachers. It was not the black men. It was the black women in Montgomery, Alabama, who were the ones who started the Montgomery bus boycott. Then Rosa Parks sits down. They began December 1st, 1955. They began to bring them to their knees. But understand, Montgomery, it went all the way to the Supreme Court, but then Montgomery buckled because it was a money thing, y'all. That began a 13-year odyssey. When you begin to see the fight over civil rights, you then begin to see the laws passed, the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And guess what happened? You had these Republicans who actually were supportive of civil rights. And all of a sudden, Barry Goldwater runs for president in 1964. He was a senator from Arizona. And then what does Barry Goldwater do? Barry Goldwater then, he opposes the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That was his bedrock. King was so offended by that King actually campaigned for President Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964, something that he never did. But they said it was so important for Goldwater not to win because Barry Goldwater was going to stop civil rights in its tracks. Why is that important? Why is Barry Goldwater's opposition to the 64 Civil Rights Act so important? Because the 64 Civil Rights Act dealt with public accommodations. It dealt with you couldn't bar people from restaurants and transportation. It went on and on and on. Oh, well, I'm sorry. That means that you couldn't bar people. You could not discriminate against people. And so guess what? They inserted women into the 64 Civil Rights Act. That racist from Virginia, Judge Smith, thinking that would kill the bill. It actually helped pass the bill. That's important because you can now go to Title IX, and that's one of the reasons why it was passed, because of the 64 Civil Rights Act. It's a provision of the Civil Rights Act. So why is this important? Because what happens? King gets killed April 4, 1968, assassinated. 69, Nixon becomes president. Arthur Fletcher brings in the fourth affirmative action. You have a period from 68 to the early 80s where black mayors begin to take over. You begin to see contracts, quotas, affirmative action, dollars. Second Reconstruction. You had dollars flowing during the first one. You had dollars flowing during the second one. All of a sudden, you get to the 80s. Nixon, he's gone. Carter's president. Reagan runs. Oh, the same President Ronald Reagan, who he was governor of California, running for governor of California, supported a bill for white folks not allowing them not to sell their houses to black people. Some of y'all gonna pay attention. The same Reagan who became governor, who when the Black Panthers brought their guns to the state capitol, they immediately outlawed carrying long rifles. They said, oh, hell no. That was actually legal. The same Reagan who changed the rules that caused for tuition in college for you to be charged because they did not want the regular, ordinary, common man to become educated. Man, some of y'all are going to have to learn some damn history. So what then happened? So here you have a period from 69 to about 82, 83. And Reagan wins in 1980, inaugurated in 1981. What does Reagan then do? Reagan begins to go after affirmative action programs. You then begin to see the lawsuits happen. Then you begin to see the decisions coming down out of the Supreme Court where they then begin to put constraints on affirmative action. That's an economic situation. And Reagan in his 8 years begins to unleash holy hell economically against black people. And then what happens on May 25th, 2020? George Floyd is killed. George Floyd is killed on May 25th, 2020, and folk like me said, y'all, this is the third Reconstruction. We said in that aftermath that unlike the first two, which largely focused on civil rights, although economics was a part of it, this should be solely focused on civil rights. What happens in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd? You begin to see white people and Latino folks, and you begin to see Asians protesting, shutting companies down, forcing them to make economic commitments to be change agents. And white conservatives went, oh, shit. We can't have this. We cannot have a generation or two of young white people who are reading and being educated about the real history of America. There's no coincidence. The attacks on critical race theory comes after George Floyd's death. Oh, some of you may say, well, I still don't understand. What's the deal here? Because the attacks on CRT and the attacks on wokeness were all designed to drive a wedge through conscious white people and the folk who wanted to keep the system the same. You had white people in companies who were forcing them. Adidas announced a $10 million commitment, and the white folks in the company lost their mind so much the next day the CEO said, oh, it's going to be $100 million. Companies pledged 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 billion in economic commitments in the wake of the death of George Floyd. And then the right said, no, we cannot have this. Oh, no, hell no. Remember, May 25th, 2020, Trump was in the White House. We cannot have this because if we have this coalition of young white people who now all of a sudden becomes conscious, who all of a sudden becomes awake, then all of a sudden we are guaranteed to lose elections in the future. And so what do they then begin to do? They begin to complain about books. They begin to complain about what they're seeing in libraries, and what then happens. They begin to run for school board. Moms for Liberty begins to rise up. And so they take all of that fury in 2021 and begin to win. And that goes into 2022. It sets up the return of Donald Trump. But what a lot of people have been missing is that Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954 leads to, of course, in 1955. And all of a sudden, you begin to see the changes made by those federal judges. And so the hardcore right goes, damn it, we got to combat this. And the civil rights laws begin to come in 1960. And they said, no, we can't have this. And then all of a sudden, because of what black people did, fighting for civil rights, and then it was black people's fighting for civil rights, which opened the doors for immigrants to be able to come into the country. Thank you, Indian Americans. You're welcome, Pakistani Americans. You're welcome, Asian Americans, because that's black people make it happen. Then the white folks said, oh, hell no. This all of a sudden, this multiracial America, we ain't having that. That's why you begin to see rich folks, the Mellons of the world, begin to fund the Heritage Foundation, fund the conservative think tanks, because they needed to establish a structure to reframe America, because we cannot have a multiracial America where these people are going to be in power. So we are going to attack economics, affirmative action. We're going to attack voting rights. We're going to attack everything which is the underpinning of the society. All these things happen, which is why, folks, you have a Robert Mercer, billionaire, funder of Breitbart. What does he do? This is what he said. Go to my iPad. Mercer often argued that the 1964 Civil Rights Act was a mistake. According to the New Yorker, a former employee claimed that Mercer asserted repeatedly that African Americans were better off economically before the civil rights. Mercer allegedly claimed that black people were racist, and they were no more racist, that there were no more white racists. He said black people were racist and that there were no more white racists. That's the billionaire Robert Mercer, who was one of the biggest funders of Donald Trump in the 2016 election, who was the chief funder of Breitbart. This election, you had Charlie Kirk, the CEO of Turning Point USA, who was organizing and galvanizing young white folks on college campuses all across the country, especially young white men. This is what Charlie Kirk said about the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
Be clear, created a beast, and that beast has now turned into an anti-white weapon.
Yeah, and that's the reality. And so we just need to fundamentally relook at a lot of our civil rights legal regime. And without that, even though I don't think it's sort of the magic bullet, but I think without that, there's limits to the amount of progress we're going to make.
Let's talk about discourse and dialogue. This topic would have been even more forbidden 4 or 5 years ago, but it's now becoming in more and more mainstream circles. Is that because the problem is becoming worse, or but our side is more courageous to confront it?
Did y'all hear that? We couldn't talk about this 4 or 5 years ago, but now we can. That's a person who literally has the ear of the person sitting in the Oval Office. We do not understand that the executive orders that have been issued this week the attacks on affirmative action in colleges and admissions. They are getting rid of programs, scholarship programs. They're getting rid of internship programs. They're getting rid of access. What this is about is the complete attack. And this is the goal of exactly what they did in 1877. This is no different than when the white racists in Mississippi convened the Constitutional Convention in 1890. And they said, we cannot let these niggas keep voting. Oh, I know, I'm sorry. Supreme Court Justice John Roberts, he doesn't use that language. That's essentially what they did when they gutted Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. The attacks on Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Do understand, right now, you have at least 4 Supreme Court justices who would love to completely get rid of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And why this is important is because the 1964 Civil Rights Act is the enforcement mechanism that has led to all of these changes for Black America since that period. So what they understand, if we assault the 1964 Civil Rights Act and get rid of that, and then we completely get rid of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, what we have effectively done is gutted Black leadership and African Americans from being able to take advantage of what happens in this country. So while a lot of y'all are bullshitting around on whether you can be on fucking TikTok, while you're getting caught up in some bullshit housewife, while you're having your fucking MJ and LeBron debates on who's the GOAT, there is literally, as we speak, an entire focus to gut every single civil right and economic gain that we have had since 1964 because they are pissed with those three acts. They're pissed with the Brown versus Board of Education Act. You have voucher bills that are being pushed in Texas and Tennessee and other places to gut public education. What we have to understand is there is a vicious assault to completely defund Black America.
Duck Walk by Ariel Williams. Henrietta Wilkins rushes to church one Sunday morning, accidentally leaving her gate open. Her duck, Duckwaisha, seizes the chance to take her 5 ducklings to the local pond. Along the way, the ducklings fall into a manhole, causing a town-wide rescue effort. After a frantic search, Duckwaisha finds her ducklings safely swimming in the pond, and the heartwarming story makes local news. Meanwhile, Henrietta realizes her mistake and panics, but the firemen reunite her with Duckwaisha and her ducklings, bringing a happy ending to their adventure.
Get your digital copy today at lulubooks.com and experience the adventure in EPUB or PDF format. Make sure you have a compatible reader to dive into this unforgettable journey. Don't miss out, unlock the secrets, and let the story begin.
The Terms and Conditions of a King, A New Beginning. Ariel, with her young daughter Jasmine, walked into the optical lens store one day to find King being verbally attacked by his coworkers. Witnessing this harsh treatment, Ariel immediately felt a deep sense of sympathy and concern for King. She stepped in, offering support, which forged a strong bond of friendship between them. Over time, as their friendship blossomed, they began to share their personal lives and struggles. Eventually, they both discovered something astonishing. They had been connected for much longer than either realized. They had been meeting in a shared dreamscape, where they had formed a deep, unspoken connection. Ariel had been there to comfort King in a difficult time, offering him advice, unaware that their paths would eventually cross in the waking world. This revelation deepened their bond, and they began to explore not only their growing friendship but also the strange, mystical connection they shared through their dreams.
Get your digital copy today at lulubooks.com and experience the adventure in EPUB or PDF format. Make sure you have a compatible reader to dive into this unforgettable journey. Don't miss out, unlock the secrets, and let the story begin.
The Park of Secrets.
In the year 2060, near the heart of Florida, just a stone's throw from Disney World, stood a theme park unlike any other, a place known as the House of Secrets. It was a magical park, much like a state fair, filled with towering rides, carnival games, and parades that drew people from all over the world. But among the grand Ferris wheel and the colorful day parade, there was one attraction that outshined them all, the Parade Princess, a mesmerizing mermaid named Kenya. Kenya was a sight to behold. At 22 years old, fresh out of college, she had the kind of beauty that drew people to her like moths to a flame. Her brown skin glowed under the park lights, her hair a stunning mix of purple and pink that cascaded over her shoulders. Little pink hearts adorned her cheeks, and a ribbon of color stretched across her nose. But it wasn't just her beauty that made her special.
Get your digital copy today at lulubooks.com and experience the adventure in EPUB or PDF format. Make sure you have a compatible reader to dive into this unforgettable journey. Don't miss out, unlock the secrets, and let the story begin.